thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
It's quite funny because I always say to people, thank you for coming because they come to my podcasty room at home. But today we are in your amazing studio.
Yeah. Welcome.
Yes, the people who are not watching the video will have to go and have a look.
Yeah.
Well, either the background of Alys's space.
We're at the bottom of my garden.
Yeah.
In Bitton Park.
Yeah.
So yeah, the sort of, the suburbs and I like the location of the bottom of the garden. It feels like a sort of a slightly secret place where fun things can happen.
Oh, I like that. Like the secret garden. Yeah. Oh, well, to open up our conversation and get to know each other and anyone listening, can I ask you the first question, which is I think actually I'm going to change it because I normally ask people what creativity means to them.
Yeah.
And would they class themselves as a creative person? But for you, because you're a creative coach and artist, I think it's pretty obvious that you think of yourself as a creative person. So I'll ask you instead, how would you define creativity? What does that mean to you?
I definitely think of myself as a creative person, and it's definitely part of my identity. And probably always has been. I think creativity is something that all humans are doing all the time. From cooking the dinner to working out a shortcut for your journey home. I think creativity is in all of our sort of actions and decisions where we're problem solving.
Yeah.
Where we're transforming something. We're kind of starting with nothing and making something, or we're starting with something and turning it into something else. So I'm a big advocate of encouraging people to see their own creativity. And I think that a lot of people lose contact with their sense of creativity, maybe through school, and, creative activity becomes associated with, did you do art or music or drama, or did you not? And if you didn't, kind of losing contact maybe with that sense of yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think creativity is really powerful, and it's not just for some people.
Yeah.
Working with students, I think I've learned a lot about how you nurture creativity. So I think, people may often feel like, oh, I could never do that. That's not for me. I don't have those skills. I don't have those ideas.
Yeah.
And I think what I've learned through observing is how when people do the things they really love, they do them a lot, and that's how they become really good at them.
Yeah.
So I think I always want to try and demystify that a little bit. If you want to be good at something, it's not a question of can I be or can't I be, am I or am I not? It's much more like you just need to do that thing. You need to do that thing, and then you'll get good at it.
Yeah.
So that is oversimplifying in a way, but I do feel like it's important. I think a lot of people feel there are sort of barriers for their own creative activity because, oh, I could never be that good. I could never get there. I don't have that talent, and I don't necessarily believe it works like that.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. It's almost like a muscle, isn't it? And if you don't exercise it, it's still there, but it's dormant in a way.
Yeah.
Waking it up a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it depends so much on how you are nurtured. The opportunities that you have, whether you get to try stuff, whether you get to experience stuff, whether you get to talk about stuff, whether that kind of thing is valued or not. If those things don't get nurtured for you, they're not just going to spontaneously flourish.
Yeah.
So
That's such a good point.
yeah, I think it's really important because people kind of, they can feel like there's a big gap or a big line between, are you creative or are you not? Could I do this or could I not? And I don't think there's a line. I think there's just kind of action and consequence, if you like.
Yeah. Did you have someone growing up that kind of nurtured that for you, or was that later on in life?
Well,
Let's start.
I definitely would have to thank my mum, who took me to art galleries and museums.
Mm.
So when I was, I mean, it's something that's important to her, and she's a creative person. But I think sort of distinctly when I was quite young, my mum was having some hospital treatment in London, and she would take me and my brother with her on the train. She was a single parent at the time. So we'd go up to London, spend some time in a hospital waiting room, and go into an art gallery or a museum. And those were just the most kind of exciting days in my world at that stage, getting on the train, the kind of excitement of the scale of London and experiencing.
Somewhere different.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think what I learned was that art galleries were spaces where things could happen that didn't happen outside of them. So sort of even like nudity, there were things that happened in pictures and in artwork inside gallery spaces that was kind of like it was okay for it to happen there. Things that were maybe provocative or controversial or just different ideas could be sort of played with in those spaces. I think that's something that I kind of connected with at quite an early age, that there was this space you could step into where things were slightly different and a bit more possible. And yeah, I think that's something that, as well as the fact that I was a kid who loved making things and drawing, I think it was probably experiencing and looking in that way that did kind of nurture me as an artist.
Yeah. Hmm. I feel like there's so many routes I could go down this book. What was the first part of your kind of artistic career? Would you say that started when you went to university, or was it later than that?
Um, well, I pursued. I guess art was my favourite subject at
Mm.
school, and I kept kind of pursuing that. Um, and I went after doing my A levels. So I had great teaching for my art A level, not great teaching for my GCSE. And I went to do an art foundation course at Winchester School of Art.
I did that too.
Well,
Not at
interesting.
Winchester, at Eastleigh, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, the foundation course is a wonderful thing. I didn't have a great year on mine. I think particularly at that point in your life, it's a big transitional period.
Yeah.
But I did have some great times. I guess it didn't all come together for me, and I was probably a bit distracted by other stuff that was going on at the same time. But I knew that I really liked that art school kind of feeling. It's a bit of a roundabout route that I took. I was going to study fine art, um, and I took a year out and went traveling and came back and ended up on an animation degree through clearing. I got placed through clearing. So it's a more roundabout kind of tale than that, but sparing the not so interesting details. I kind of found myself somewhat by surprise
Yeah.
on a degree course that was really practical filmmaking, but you could specialize in animation kind of within that. So yeah, I guess, yeah, I knew I was creative before that. I knew I wanted to pursue art. I particularly love drawing and painting, but with my vision of going to study fine art, that was all about the course that I'd identified I wanted to do was, allowed you to work across all different kinds of media. So I think I knew, and I think I knew that from the foundation course, that experimenting and being able to move quite freely between different mediums and techniques was the right thing. And then, yeah, I found myself on this animation course, and it wasn't totally kind of random, but it was a swerve. It was a different sort of route than I'd expected to take.
Yeah, a squiggle.
Yeah, and found myself alongside loads of people who were absolutely passionate about cinema, which wasn't really my thing. So I guess even then there was a slight element of being an outsider. I was kind of really connected to drawing and painting and interested in telling stories and using sound, but kind of found myself immersed in learning about cinema and surrounded by people who were really passionate about kind of live action feature film.
Yeah.
And it was a brilliant course and a really distinctive structure. That sense of making animated films, but in this context of kind of live action cinema, thinking and watching and writing essays.
Mm.
So I think that did really inform kind of who I became through that course, because it wasn't about animation as a genre. It was about animation as a technique with which to tell big, important stories.
Yeah.
And what I did subsequently, so I did a 2-year MA after my degree, and then I spent 12 years working as a freelance animation director. And that in that work, I was making animated documentary films. So using drawing and animation to tell stories about lived experience and about complicated, tricky things that maybe weren't so easy to explore in live action. So that course really did form and feed in, I think, to what I did in that first chapter of my career.
Yeah. That's so funny that I had a very similar experience, actually. I did an art foundation.
Yeah.
And then I started one degree because it was really broad and I could experiment, like you said. And then I realized that actually I wanted a bit more structure and focus than that. But I did architecture. So I guess a bit of the storytelling as well. But I think when you allow yourself to play, even in these kind of institutionalized contexts, you can find different routes that you might not have realized otherwise. And it's kind of like life pushes you this direction. And I don't know, exercising that creative muscle allows you to explore a bit more and not see it necessarily as I don't know, like a rule or a
Yeah,
restriction.
yeah. There definitely have been times, probably in the last 10 years, where I've sort of looked back and thought, "Oh, I wonder what would have happened if I had gone and done the fine art degree." But I don't feel any sense of regret about it. I mean, I think in a lot of ways I'm still finding myself as an artist, and that's still in that sense of kind of summoning up my own visual language, and it's still a sort of feeling of discovery about the kind of work that comes out when I have the opportunity to kind of make my own work rather than working to a brief. But what I really did learn on my degree and got to refine a bit and sort of develop a bit further on my MA was these practical filmmaking skills, which I then used to earn a living. And I think that was really valuable. I think that 12 years of being freelance and kind of learning to be self-employed and learning to kind of run my own business and putting a lot of energy into building relationships and pursuing leads and pitching for things and applying for things, and then getting a job and bringing together a team and really being a producer as much as a director, making sure that all the budget's balanced and everything was delivered on time. I did an awful lot of learning on the job, and it took an awful lot of energy, but those were really valuable skills that I still kind of draw from and still benefit from, I think, and really useful experiences that help to inform some of the work I do today, supporting other creative people.
Yeah. And that's something I really want to talk about.
Mm.
I think it'd be really interesting to hear about it's like mentoring type of thing, isn't it? Creative coaching. It's
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. So I tend to describe myself and the work that I do as being a specialist in artist support. Um, but it's quite hard. It's quite hard to pin down. Uh, and this question of like what's coaching and what's mentoring also, I think, can be quite
Yeah.
hard to kind of pick apart and understand. And excuse me. Um, but yeah, so my income generating work, my freelance work now is working with creative people of all kinds. And that can take a number of different forms. So a lot of the work that I do is with creative people one to one, and meeting with them, whether online or in person, to help them with a particular project that they might be working through. So I might meet with them, monthly or quarterly or more frequently to help them with a specific project and kind of check in and keep on track, and help signpost them to the resources that they need to do what it is that they're doing. Um, or some people I meet with like that on a regular basis, and it's not about a specific project, but it's kind of keeping them connected to a shift or a change that they're trying to make. So I guess it's like the time they spend with me is where they get to kind of say all of that stuff out loud, and have some kind of accountability as well. Um, and so this thing about coaching and mentoring, I would say that when I'm working one-to-one with creative people, I use coaching and mentoring techniques. And I think about coaching as being, in essence, it's really about giving people space to kind of step into and speak about what it is that they're trying to do or what it is that's getting in the way, and really reflecting that back to them. It's about uh, it's not that's not about me telling them how to do it or how to get it right. It's about me kind of creating that space, holding that space for them, that kind of deep listening, and then reflecting back and showing them what they already know, or showing them what they maybe what they can't see for themselves. It's a wonderful process. I really, really love those conversations. But equally, in those one-to-one conversations, I may well be um, there may well be mentoring, which I think of as being able to draw on my own experiences and the knowledge and the connections that I have to guide and advise people with next steps, or signpost them to resources or people or organisations that might be able to help them. So yes, I would define that one-to-one work that I do as involving a mixture of coaching and mentoring. I wouldn't put it in one or the other camp, because for me, both of those things kind of come up in those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mentioned supporting people through projects or through a shift or a transition. Some of the work I do one-to-one with people is more like a deep dive. So rather than ongoing meetings, it might be a one-off. Usually that's like a 2-hour session where they'll come with maybe 2 or 3 questions or areas of their practice that they want to kind of drill down into a bit more, or maybe things that feel like they're getting in the way. And through that conversation, we can identify, maybe what some of those obstacles are, and start talking about what strategies might be to overcome them, or, help people from that kind of quite a deep, intense conversation come away with some next steps or a kind of list of priorities that will help to guide whatever it is they go and do next.
Yeah. And there's so many things that come under the creative umbrella, aren't there? You just get lots of different
Yeah,
practices.
yeah, yeah. Well, my background is in my practice is in visual arts and in moving image. So I guess I've got broader knowledge, particularly in the sort of mentoring aspect, or experiences that I can draw on in relation to those two. But yeah, I also work with writers, musicians, performers, um, designers, illustrators. It's wonderful, you know.
Exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it is such a privilege to kind of step into somebody else's creative world, and I absolutely love the work. You know, I really, really love it. I've never struggled to get out of bed, you know, to kind of get to work and have a conversation with a creative person, because it's just so fascinating, and people's ideas and possibilities and dreams are so rich. You know, to be invited into that space and to kind of hear about those things is yeah, it's a great joy.
Yeah.
Always very happy to do it.
It's like Alice in Wonderland.
Well, I think it's yeah, yeah. It's just a very special space. You know, I
Mm.
recognise that um it can be quite vulnerable.
Yes.
Um and and I think when people share those things with me, this is what I really want. This is what I really believe is possible. This is what I'm finding really difficult. This is what's really kind of in the way. This is what I'm really scared of.
Mm.
You know, yeah, it does feel like it's, people are trusting me a lot with that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it really feels like a privilege in that way. But
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated and always want to kind of, you know, respond and try and think about the strategies or the possibilities, or um, where there may be kind of paths to follow that haven't been explored so far.
Yeah. Do you have things that people doing lots of different creative or working in lots of different creative areas, do they have similar struggles? Are there things that come up quite a lot?
I would say that an obstacle for an awful lot of people could be framed under the general title of self-doubt. I think it's much more nuanced than that, and there's a lot of variation kind of within that, a sense of a lack of entitlement, finding it hard to allow oneself to take the time and the resources and the energy to invest in the creative practice, be feeling focused on external stuff and you know, am I good enough, or what do people think, or you know, if you only tune into the stuff kind of out there, in the you know, in the wider world, then I think it's very easy to talk yourself out of your own kind of creative desires. There's so many reasons not to, or so many reasons why it's not a good idea, or so many, you know, there's so much potential, I think, for that, for people not to feel that they can really occupy that space, or that not to feel entitled to kind of um, really focus their energies and their resources on that. But talking about resources, I think that's the other one that comes up time and again, and that's probably no surprise that, you know, the time to invest in a creative practice, the space to do it,
Mm.
the money that it takes, even to do the kind of perfunctory fundamental things like, you know, have a portfolio website and, you know, membership to a network, or there are so many small things that can add up or that can be hard to keep going, that there's a sort of fundamental level of investment in a practice that can often feel really flipping hard to achieve, you know, really difficult to make that possible. But I'm a really strong believer that creative practice is a seasonal thing rather than a constant. My experience has been that in my life there have been, you know, there have been moments, there have been times where I've been able to be really productive. I've been nurtured. I've had access to resources. There have been other periods where I haven't at all, and I haven't been able to make anything, you know, for years. And that's something that can come up in these kinds of conversations, where people feel like if it's a fallow period, that sort of diminishes what they might do in the future, and it diminishes what they've done in the past. And I I really believe that not to be the case. I think we all have to live with it. It's an absolute fact that, you know, life, health, relationships, employment, money, there are so many other things that can get in the way. But it's like keep that little flame burning, because it is possible for things to realign and for things to change. And I think we have to see that. And again, maybe, what does success look like in the kind of exterior world, or kind of role models or heroes or people who appear to be successful? I think maybe it's hard to see that stuff.
Yes.
But I feel like I know it from my own experience, and I also know it from how many other people I've worked with. It's seasonal. There are these bounteous harvests, and there are these long fallow periods, and that's okay.
Yeah. God, yeah, that's a really good point. I feel like a lot of people listening to this will find that really reassuring. And it's like you said at the beginning, just nurturing that the process
Yeah,
of being creative, isn't it? It's a journey.
absolutely, absolutely. I think there are fundamental things that a creative practice needs, and it can be really difficult to have all of those at the same time. Um, but a space to work, um, access to resources, people to guide you,
Mm.
um, the opportunity to kind of learn new things and be exposed to new ideas, and a community.
Yeah.
The camaraderie and the solidarity of working alongside other people. If you're doing if you're doing a degree, or you're part of a studio community, or maybe that community you connect with in, like, video calls. Maybe you're not physically close at all, but
Mm.
having people to have conversations with, that kind of validation and that kind of space to talk about what's difficult, or to talk about what you're hoping for or working towards, and to be nurtured.
Yeah.
Again, so much that's useful comes from conversation with others, and people being able to do that. Oh, did you know about this? Have you tried that? There's this book I think you might like.
Yeah.
That kind of wonderful. I always think about it as if it's in a physical space, as that sense of someone kind of leaning over your shoulder, and being able to say, "Oh, did you know there's a shortcut for that?" That's so valuable. It's so rich, and it is so hard I think, to maintain a creative practice, and so hard to thrive creatively if you don't have some kind of community, some peers to travel alongside.
Absolutely. That was part of the reason for starting this podcast as well, to make these thoughts and experiences and stories known for people who aren't necessarily in the same physical space and don't have those circles of people to talk to. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think it's so important.
Yeah. Are there particular places that you tend to refer people to a lot in terms of resources and support and grants and things like that? Or does it vary depending on who you're talking to?
Yeah, it varies. It definitely varies. But there are some, I guess the ones that come up most frequently would be the national arts funding, so Arts Council England, um, AN, which is the UK's professional membership organisation for visual artists. ArtQuest, which is London based but has a huge amount of information online. Um, I'm trying to think of more now, but those are definitely a kind of in a top three.
Yeah.
And visual arts oriented, but I guess, yeah, places where resources and support are available with a really sort of broad range. I can't think of the right word.
Cover a broad range of
They do.
things.
Yeah, yeah. That basically, yeah, the stuff that lots of people are looking for.
Yeah. Honestly, don't know that much about fundraising, and it would be interesting to hear maybe at which point of somebody's creative practice would they go out to look for fundraising and
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So it's a really good question, sort of when is the right time to make a funding application? And I think it varies across different creative practices. I think there are some fields where almost the only way to get work made is to be responding to open calls, for a commission. I guess I'm thinking about like, public art, participatory work. So having to kind of pitch and propose projects, respond to briefs. The arts funding that I'm often supporting people to apply for from Arts Council England breaks down into two schemes. There are two schemes that individuals can apply for, and their main fund is project grants, which is from quite a small amount to a very large amount potentially, for a project that an audience will experience. It will have impact or benefit to an audience.
Okay.
And the other scheme is developing your creative practice, which an individual can apply to for up to £12,000 for a project that's up to a year long, that is about their own skills and their own development. So it's not about delivering something to an audience. It's about that kind of nurturing, learning new things, learning new skills, building networks and relationships and so on. And so when's the right time? I guess the short answer would be, with developing your creative practice, or DYCP as it's often referred to, the right point is where there's some kind of shift going on, and you need support in order to enable that shift to happen.
Oh, okay, I see.
And that can be quite hard to kind of define or pin down, but that's when that fund works really well, I would say. You don't have to be very established or very experienced to apply for it. But I think what I've seen in applications that are successful is when, there's a possibility on the horizon, but it will be very difficult to make the most of it unless you have this support to kind of prepare for it and to engage with it. So an example might be a residency or an international exhibition or something of that kind. And in terms of project grants, it's a more lengthy and involved application process, and the project planning, there's an awful lot of project planning that needs to be done before you submit the application. So, for example, a very sort of specific budget and timeline, and partners who might be organizations or venues, ideally kind of on board and kind of confirmed in their participation, how you're going to promote it, who it's going to reach. There's an awful lot that you have to really have kind of worked out before you submit the application. So I guess when's the right time for that kind of funding application is probably when you're quite clear about what you want to take to an audience, when you're probably quite clear about who that audience is and where that audience is, and you have established some relationships with people who can help you to do that.
Okay.
So those kinds of projects really need to be kind of anchored, I suppose. I find it very difficult to kind of summarize and simplify, because there's so much that I could say.
Yeah,
But and I don't mean to say any of that to put anyone off, but I think it's useful to know that with project grants,
yeah,
it's not very easy or quick to make an application. It's incredibly competitive. It's an investment of your time to make. And so it's definitely worth finding out as much information as you can about it and making sure it's the right fund before you commit to that process. But there are lots of smaller funders and more accessible and quicker turnaround opportunities to bring in some kind of cash to support your practice. So
A-Space is really good for that.
yeah, A-Space have done, A-Space have done the Turning Point bursary, which is you could look like a sort of smaller version of a developing your creative practice. It's a smaller scale in terms of time, I think, and the amount of money, but that same kind of question of, what's the shift that you're ready to make? What is it that you need to be able to move things on to the next level? What might be possible if you can get this support now? And AN offer bursaries at a similar sort of scale. A-Space also do their Lucky Dip funding, which is, genius because it's not asking you to make a lengthy application and propose something in a lot of detail. And yeah, there are lots of others in different creative fields as well, often about specific to a creative field, funding for training or upskilling or helping you kind of move to that next level of your practice. So yeah, that's one of the things I love about working with people in different fields is it makes me have to really dig down and look for, what's possible, what's out there. And that feels like a good thing to gather that knowledge together and be able to share it and pass it on to people.
Yeah, it's like unearthing things, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear about because I guess I've always operated and heard about creative practices that are kind of still, I don't know, at a slightly lower level where you're not necessarily thinking of all these practicalities of how are you going to manage the money that you're getting and how are you going to execute this project. And I guess networking is probably also part of that conversation, coming to see you, but also getting out into the wild and telling people about your project to start with. Yeah. Do you think, is that an important part as well, do you think? Getting out into, I guess, real social spaces and just mingling with people.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think that a network is a really super powerful and important thing. I think networking is a really kind of uncomfortable word.
True.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's something that I talk about and think about a lot. I think one of the things I was able to do in that first sort of chapter of my career was I was bringing in enough money from creative work that I could afford to take the time to kind of turn up to something. Being able to go out in person to events and turn up and meet people in the flesh is really valuable, but it's not the only way to do it.
Yeah.
Particularly since the pandemic, I think there were so many opportunities to attend events and participate in conversations and panel discussions, join kind of, watch film festival content, the, kind of academic conferences and symposiums. There's so much potential to participate in stuff that you can't physically get to now than there was before. And I think although it's different, you don't have that kind of eye contact and kind of small talk necessarily, it's still just as possible to make kind of rich and valuable relationships from those kinds of online interactions. I think that it's really useful anytime you have an interaction with somebody at that kind of event or, in whatever walk of life it is, and whether it's physical or online, to be able to follow up with them. And I think that's how those kind of new relationships can develop. Following up, staying in contact, asking people questions, offering them something, thinking about how you build a relationship, how you build a friendship. I'm often using the analogy of like being invited to somebody's house for dinner and you turn up with a bunch of flowers or a bottle of wine or something. Yeah. It can be really, really hard, I think, that sense of, oh, I'm on the outside. And that kind of cold calling sense of like, oh, I really want to know this person. I want to learn from them. I want to ask them questions about what they do. It feels very disempowering to think, oh, I've got to try and, why would they talk to me? How do I do this? But I think you can change that dynamic for yourself.
Yeah.
By thinking about what can you bring, what can you offer to try. I mean, that might not happen. The worst thing that can happen is you hear nothing back, but I think it can really change the sort of chemistry of the exchange. If you think about, oh yeah, I want to tell you this about your work, or I wonder if you are interested in this, or I wonder if you know about that.
Yeah.
And really, really rich relationships can develop that way. But the other thing about networks and networking that I think is important is never to overlook the value of your existing network. And again, I think that the word networking can feel like it's about kind of schmoozing in a room full of strangers or cold calling kind of. And I think it's really easy to do. So I'm often advocating for people I work with to kind of mind map or find a way to really look at, who's in your existing network, who do you already know, and how might they be able to help you with the thing that you're trying to do. Somehow, I think our human brains are so tuned into what we don't know yet, what we haven't done yet. I mean, presumably for a good reason, for kind of survival and all the rest of it. But we really see that stuff. We really feel it. And I don't think we have the same kind of connection and the same kind of clarity about what we already know, valuing the experiences that we have and recognizing the sort of assets and the possibilities that might come from sort of where we already are. So I think that's a really powerful, it could be like a 5-10 minute little mind mapping task, but I think it can be a really, really powerful one.
Yeah. And I think, did you say in your notes when we were getting ready to record the podcast that you're making a toolkit? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah. So I in the work I do with creative people, uh, I'm often helping people with applying for funding or writing a proposal for a particular commission or exhibition or opportunity. That can take a number of different forms. Sometimes I'm working with people in a video call for an hour or two to sort of hold their hand and help them make sure, keep on track with an application. Sometimes I'm working as an access support worker. So funders like Arts Council England, BFI, lots of others. If an applicant has access needs, which could be if you're neurodiverse or deaf or disabled, or you have a long-term health condition, which could be physical or mental health, they will pay for someone like me to give significant support, a significant number of hours of support to help you navigate your way through the parts of the application process that may be challenging for you. Um, and I've been thinking from that work that I love to do. It's the problem solving stuff, and it's helping people to kind of articulate that vision and that dream project, perhaps, and do the practical stuff of getting the resources to make that possible. Yes, I've been thinking about how can I share what I know more widely, and I think often people are intimidated by the starting point. Where do I start with a funding application? Oh, what about a kind of budget? What about all of these things? So yeah, I'm soon to launch a toolkit which is about getting started. 6 steps to starting your funding application.
I like it. It sounds great.
I hope it will be. Something simple that helps people to get the ball rolling and helps them to see what's possible.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to funding applications, are there things that you would advise people don't do or try and avoid? I know it's quite difficult to answer when it's different practices.
Well, I think there are 2 really easy answers to that question. And one is, don't try and do it if you haven't got enough time. And that is so much easier said than done. And I've been there. I've absolutely been that person, submitting something kind of 1 minute to the deadline. So, I can know all the good practice and not necessarily be able to play that out. So I totally know that. But what I see is that when you don't have enough time to draft and redraft, to show it to other people and get feedback, it rarely is one of those applications that will work its way into the shortlist or up to the top of the pile.
Okay.
So that's my number one top tip is, if you want to apply for something, really ask yourself if you've got enough time and really plan out that time, including, it's not just your time, but it's including who can help me, who can I ask for advice, who can give me some feedback, who can proofread for me. I think I would say that thinking about it as that kind of process is a real, really helps in terms of working towards a successful outcome. And the other one I think sounds kind of a bit pernickety, but again, I think I've seen this so many times, and that is make sure that you're applying what you're applying for, what you're applying to, that it matches up and it aligns. Um, I think we've all been there with a vision in our mind and maybe an opportunity that we come across that we manage to kind of persuade ourselves is a match or is the right kind of alignment.
Yeah.
And so many opportunities for creative people are competitive. If it isn't the right match, if it doesn't meet the guidelines, it's never going to get into the shortlist. And it's really easy to get kind of swept up in the sense of potential and possibility and maybe not really recognize that there's a bit of a mismatch. And that's a real shame if you've invested a lot of yourself and a lot of time in something that isn't the right match. So that doesn't feel like I said it sort of feels pernickety. It feels like, oh, make sure you've read the guidelines.
No, I know what you mean. I've done that with job applications before, and then you get an interview and you're like, oh no, I don't think this was actually such a good idea. And yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's hard. All these competitive processes are really hard. I mean, the point I made previously about not enough time. If you're earning a living, paying the bills, trying to keep your practice going, family, friends, relationships, all the other stuff that you have to navigate, and then there's this deadline for this thing, it's incredibly hard to plan enough time and to kind of allocate enough resources and make sure you've really got the right match. I have absolute sympathy and understanding for everybody who's doing stuff in a hurry and sort of trying to persuade themselves that this is the right match for their thing when it may not be. Because I've been there and I've seen it. I recognize what all of those practicalities are that put us in that position. But those are definitely the two easy answers I can give you to that question. I think they're the two things that create the biggest risk.
Yeah. Wow, that's very eye-opening to see, because it's skills that you wouldn't always necessarily correlate with creativity and, I guess, being artistic or whatever it is, whatever your way of creating is. It's all these kind of documentation and reading lots of fine print, I guess, and what's under the surface of all of these systems that we kind of want to get into to help, like you say, boost your creative practice. But yeah, it's very other side of the brain. It feels like I completely see why people would come to you for support for things like that.
Yeah, I think the nature of these kind of competitive application processes, some people, it works for some people and it creates real barriers and obstacles for others, and that's not fair. I find it immensely frustrating that access to support for creative people is not equal and fair. It's not as accessible as it could be and as it should be. And so many creative people are dyslexic, and so many application processes ask you to write about about who you are and what you do and what you want to do. I think things are changing and there are more possibilities for submitting applications that are video or audio or even kind of mind maps or Trello boards. There is an expansion in understandings of how a project might be presented and pitched beyond the 300 words for this and 5,000 characters for that. But it's slow to change. It's not. I would say it's not. It's the systems as they exist at the moment are not really fit for purpose. That kind of pitching projects, proposing things, writing applications it's only one way to make your work happen and bring it into the world. And I don't think it's the only way, and it's not the right way for everybody. You know, creative practices are so broad and so diverse, and I think I believe there's value in everything. So um, I guess unfortunately it feels inevitable in that quest for getting resources to support your work, that's where these competitive processes come. But I think there's loads of value in collaboration, kind of artist-led projects, and innovating and DIY and different ways of bringing together resources to support creative events and activities and make things happen.
And I kind of want to ask you, because we're obviously in Southampton and the podcast is based around creativity in Southampton. Do you feel like there are good places to facilitate this? Like whether it's for people to come in and see different practices and mingle with people, or get the resources that they need and support that they need?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can talk about organisations that have supported me over the years. For me, the OG is City Eye, who I experienced when I think I was 14 or 15 years old. I had my first taste of making animation at this very informal workshop that I rocked up to with my, scruffy teenage friends, and the pressure was off. It wasn't formal. It was a really good route in at that time. And later I was part of their young filmmakers group, and collaborated on a project. And actually, now I reflect on it, City Eye, they encouraged us to and helped us to make an application for funding to support that project. So not only the creative and collaborative part, but I was starting to learn about the other aspects, and what does the landscape look like, and how do you access support. When I came back to Southampton after going away to do my degree and then my MA, City Eye employed me to run workshops for them. I later became a trustee of the organisation, and last year they showed a film of mine at Southampton Film Week. So I feel like I owe them an awful lot. And they're very much kind of woven through my story and my experiences. I mentioned earlier working for A Space Arts, and again, it's quite a long relationship that I have with that organisation in different ways. I was one of the first, I think there were 6 or 7 of us artists, the first group to move into the Arches Studios in 2005.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. And so I've been a studio resident there and at Tower House. They've commissioned me as an artist. They've exhibited my work in gallery spaces that they've run. And then I worked for them for 3 years as artist development officer, running the program of support for artists. A shout out to Soko Music Project for running Chaos Network. And particularly thinking about when I had my first baby. She's 14 now, but going along to Chaos meetings was a way that I could still kind of be present and be visible in the creative scene. And because before I went on maternity leave, I was teaching part-time and I was working freelance. I really kind of, both of those things really stopped for me, and kind of stepping out of that felt like it just felt like I was quite separate from it. And taking little baby Nesta along, crawling around at Chaos meetings, but being welcome and feeling welcome, I think that's something that was really valuable. Other organisations that have supported me in my work, this is a sad one, the Much Missed Showcase Gallery that was part of Solent University.
I haven't heard of that one.
So it was in the building opposite Mast and John Hansard Gallery. that was part of Solent University and is now part of the University of Southampton. So Showcase Gallery, run by Kate Maple, and before that, Kate and Les Buckingham, was great at curating exhibitions that were participatory and a space for artists working locally and making work about the city and about communities. So much missed, very sad that that's no longer there. Recently, I've had really good support from The Point in Eastleigh, who are known for performing arts, but they have support for creative people of all kinds. They make space available, so you can easily access rehearsal space or space to test out work. And have always been just really warm and really welcoming. And I was involved in a scratch night event that they had where I was able to test something out on a really large scale. And this time last year, I was very fortunate to be the artist who did an artist pop-up at John Hansard Gallery in response to the Pia Arca Silences and Stories exhibition. And that was a wonderful experience. I was really warmly hosted and well supported in their active space, inviting exhibition visitors in to kind of play with me, to have an experience that helped open up conversations about the themes in the exhibition. But yeah, a really valuable bit of support. Felt like kind of nurturing some of my own practice and making it accessible to audiences. So yeah, those are some of the organisations. No doubt there are others, and I'll have forgot some important ones, but those are really some key ones that I can say have helped me along the way over a long period of time.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like I could ask you so many questions. I know that.
I know I can't. I mean, I can just keep going.
This always happens. I'm like, we have to do a part 2. Yeah, I feel like you've done so many things, and it would be really difficult to cover all of them and touch on everything because it's so broad and wide-reaching. But are there something in particular that led to you moving on from teaching and starting your business?
Yeah, I would say that, and it feels to me like it's definitely been a kind of a circuitous route rather than a kind of straightforward career path.
Yeah, an exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reasons why things have moved and shifted in my practice and in how I'm generating income has been about other stuff happening in life, really. My era of working as an animation director really wasn't sustainable once I had kids. And it took me a while to work that out, but in the nature of that work, people come with a big idea and a small budget and a tight timescale. And before I had kids, that was possible. I could say, oh, right, okay, I've got to kind of drop everything else for the next 3 weeks and really make this happen.
Yeah.
And so when I had kids, not suddenly, but sort of gently, things started to shift. I started doing more teaching, which was more kind of daytime, childcare available during hours of employment kind of work. Also, at that point, I really distinctly remember, so I have 2 kids, but on my first maternity leave, I think sort of stepping off that wheel of what's the next project, pitching, responding to briefs, how do I deliver what people need, all of that creative problem-solving energy. Stepping off that actually gave me a chance to reflect and think about what I was doing and how much it was what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah.
So I think I absolutely loved that sense of delivering what was needed, all of the sort of problem-solving energy, but it didn't really feel like my work. And I didn't think that what I was best at in those projects was the visual and creative stuff. It was part of the mix, but it felt like what I was really getting right was the kind of liaising with the client and getting it in on budget and in on time. So I found that period of maternity leave, of stepping away from it, really useful, and it did allow me to kind of reconnect a little bit with who am I as a creative person, and what's my, what am I trying to do, and where is that? And it took me a long period really to properly reconnect with that. It was a quest, I guess, that I had for a long time to keep trying to nurture my own visual and creative practice outside of paid work. Um, I worked, I then worked in teaching for quite a long period of time, and some of that was part time. But then when my husband lost his job, which was just after our second child, I had an opportunity. I was invited to apply for a full-time teaching job, and that felt like it felt like, okay, this is what I have to do now. I then went into working full-time as a senior lecturer at Arts University Bournemouth for 3.5 years. So things have shifted and changed kind of as they've needed to, or as one thing becomes unsustainable, another thing opens up, or one thing is no longer possible and another thing becomes necessary. Um, and while I was working at AUB, I was surrounded by people being very creative, but I had no, I still wasn't able to really nurture my own creativity. It felt like I had no headspace and no energy. I also had no studio for a long period of time. So it was like it really was trying to keep that little flame alive. When I was teaching at Solent University, I would be so fired up by my conversations with students that on the bus journey home, I would draw the other passengers on the bus in this tiny little pocket-sized sketchbook. And that was my studio, and that was my practice for that whole sort of period of time. When I was working at Arts University Bournemouth, um, the space and the time that I was given, or that I needed to use for research, I used not to make new work, but to reflect on work that I'd made much longer ago. So I think I was able to kind of reconnect with some of the earlier work that I made during my MA. I was able to kind of really closely look at it again and kind of open up old sketchbooks and write and deliver conference papers about it, and think about, how I could share that with other people, the sort of processes that I'd used and the kind of ideas that I'd used. But that was a period of really trying to kind of connect back to and find again and try and pick up the threads of who am I as a creative person. And then when I left that job and started the job at Space Arts as the artist development officer, that was the point where I started to have a bit more time for my own practice. So what had been those kind of little drawings in a sketchbook, it felt like I was just about to, just able to have enough space and enough time. So when my kids were still sharing a bedroom, I used the box room in our house that was a bit of studio space, alongside the sort of drying laundry. But it was a big shift for the years before that, where it felt like nothing was possible. And so since then, so that was 2018, over the years since then, I've been able to just kind of pick it up bit by bit. And then part of the shift to working freelance again, and now doing the work that I do, supporting other creative people, doing that on a freelance basis, a lot of that has been about being able to bring my own practice into the center of my life and make my paid work fit around it, and sort of for there to be some kind of symbiotic relationship for my income generating work to nurture and to support and to bring to kind of overlap and bring the energies in that I need to stay connected to my own creative practice. And then during the pandemic, I was furloughed for a period of time, and I made a film in that time that I describe as a kind of like act of survival. I really needed my creative practice to kind of process what was happening, and to kind of get some space outside of the house, some solitude, some my creative. I had just enough time and just enough space for my creative practice to be able to exist as this thing that could help me navigate these really kind of tricky, uncertain experiences. And I think in a way that was kind of the catalyst, that project. It took me a really long time to finish it as a film, and a really long time, to sort of say that it was finished and then to be ready to show it to other people. But looking back at it now, it was the sort of shift and the turning point, if you like, where I think I knew how much I needed my creative practice to survive well and to kind of process and to make sense of experiences. Um, and in 2022, I applied for developing your creative practice funding. And so I had this year of support where I got to have conversations with other creative people, to learn some new skills. Um, and I think it was really valuable on one level, but the sort of bigger or the deeper level, I think, was about feeling the value in my practice and feeling that sense of entitlement,
Mm.
to that it was important, and to invest in it. So the work that the sort of shift that came out of that is that I'm making moving image work with drawings. Um, it's not animation, and I always feel like I'm kind of sneaking back up on animation from the side. Actually, a lot of the most recent work is like using drawings as puppets almost and moving them around in front of the camera. I work in really short bursts of kind of playful, experimental, kind of being in a flow state. Um, and that can be quite chaotic. It can be quite hard to kind of keep track of things, produce these sort of fragments of outcomes. And it can be quite difficult then to gather things together and to know when I can edit them into one outcome,
Yeah.
if it's moving image. And I also make a lot of 2D collage work. So I will make observational drawings. Things will happen quite quickly. I'll cut drawings out of the paper, kind of set the bit that worked free from the bit that didn't. Um, and then in a slower process, assemble them into collage work. Um, but I don't think, and all of that feels right, and all of that feels authentic to how I've always worked creatively. But I don't think I really knew it until really in the last couple of years. It's only now that I feel much closer to my own visual language,
Mm.
and it's about process, and it's about entitlement, it's about the space and the resources. But now I know what I'm doing, and it's about just keeping on with it. Whereas for a long time, I think I was trying to find it and trying to reconnect with stuff that had happened in the past, or things that I'd enjoyed doing, things that had felt possible. But it was a long, quest is a good word, I think, for sort of trying to know, trying to find out and feel strong about who I am as a creative person and what it is that I make, and trying not to just go round in circles, or lose kind of contact with it.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting hearing about it because I guess sometimes you could fall into the thing of thinking if someone's a coach and a mentor, they've got all of it figured out and it was easy and it just went in one straight long line and it was fine and they didn't have moments where they had to reconnect with their way of working and with themselves.
Mm. Well, I think, it is one of the very wonderful things about that work that I do, that it makes sense of all these twists and turns that I've had along the way.
Yeah.
Or I can draw on lots of different experiences and feed them into my sort of understanding of and my support for other people. But yeah, absolutely, I don't have it nailed at all. That sometimes that's frustrating, but actually I think it's not frustrating it's frustrating, I think, if you're not getting the time to spend with that part of yourself.
Yeah.
I think I just feel really grateful and very privileged and very lucky now that I do. And it's been a long time coming. And yeah, there's been a lot of waiting and a lot of frustration and a lot of feeling quite distant from my own creative practice. A lot of, just needing to do whatever it takes to pay the bills. But yeah, I feel excited, and there's that sense of discovery. And I think that's probably like a lot of creative people. There's this sort of sense of, well, it's just over the hill. Yeah, yeah. What's that? It's not about being satisfied or feeling that you've nailed it. I
Yeah.
think what drives us on is that sense of like, I know there's more out there. I haven't quite got to this yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's very much my sort of my journey.
Yeah, it's like tapping into those feelings and following the ideas and seeing where they lead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. I've really enjoyed it. Is
Oh,
there
yeah.
anything else?
I guess is where can people find more about you and your work and get in touch with you if that's what they would like to do?
Yeah. To find out about how I work with other creative people, the website is artistsupport.org.uk. And yeah, I'm really happy to answer people's questions. I think if you want to know how it could work or whether I could help you with what you need help with, yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch. Always happy to have a conversation and work that out. And whether I can signpost people to somebody else or something else.
Yeah.
My artist portfolio is at alysscotthawkins.co.uk. I'm on Instagram. If you want to kind of keep in touch and hear my news, you can sign up for my newsletter, which is on Substack. And there I let people know the sort of updates with things that are happening in my artist life, and also share some information about the artist support stuff. So if you're interested in the funding application toolkit, that's where I'll be letting people know about it and how to get hold of it.
Very exciting. Well, thank you. Oh, your words are really, really interesting and really insightful to hear about all of the knowledge that you hold.
Oh, good. Thanks. Well, I think it's working one-to-one with people, it's about what they need right now rather than the bigger conversation. And it's quite nice to be able to have slightly bigger conversations, like, what are the things to avoid here, or what is creativity, or it's that's a really nice thing to be able to do. But yeah, it's nice to have an opportunity to say, yes, I think this is important.
Yeah. Yeah. And almost like help push people on a bit and feel like they're worthy of doing that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm interested in everybody's ideas, everybody's work. Yeah, whatever it is, I'm really curious about it and I want to know about it. And that's a really lovely thing in this job to get to sort of to be an audience to so much.
Yeah. I feel like I might have to come back and talk to you about